My name is Victoria Garcia Greene. I am a senior user researcher at Tech. I come from a management consultancy background, so I was at two consultancies before this, and I've been in user research pretty much since pre-COVID, so since early 2020, late 2019. Yeah. My favorite thing about being a user researcher is that if you have a creative personality, it's a really great profession because it combines creativity with being quite analytical. As a user researcher, you're always going to have like lots of information to digest and to do something with it to then, turn it into a product or a service. And there are lots of points along that process where you get to exhibit some level of creativity, whether it's in the way that you engage with users or the methodology you take or in how you feed back to your stakeholders or collaborate with your team. And then that other side of your brain, which is kind of the more analytical, logical, let's kind of figure out what to do with this, you get that opportunity as well. So that's definitely my favorite part of being a UR. I think there's a combination of skills that you definitely need if you're going to be a good user researcher, at least. The main one for me is that you need to have really good communication skills. And within that comes strong interpersonal skills. So you are constantly going to be talking to different people. You could go into one project and be talking to elderly people, you could go into the next and be talking to children. So being able to kind of switch that dynamic and be able to still make that user feel comfortable and welcome and be friendly and also be confident in what you're asking them is super, super important. I come from a languages background, so I've spent a lot of my time just like constantly talking with people and talking to people from all different walks of life. So if you can do that and it doesn't freak you out and you can do it confidently, that's a skill that's really, really going to help you in user research. A very practical and kind of pragmatic skill is that you have to be on top of your organization game. It often falls to you to be the person who is recruiting your users, scheduling your sessions, planning your research sprints, and then looping in with your designers, with the rest of the team, feeding back to stakeholders. There is a lot that goes on. You're not just researching with users. There are a lot of other things that happen around that. So if you're not sensible and careful with your time, you will struggle. In as much as you have to be organized, you also have to be super flexible because you are inserting yourselves into someone else's life. When you speak to a user, you're on their time, it's not yours anymore. Working to their schedules and being able to show that, that flexibility, that adaptability is really key. And the last one I would say for any user researcher is you have to be open-minded. We talk a lot now about things like accessibility and inclusion, and I think when we talk about those things, you have to be open-minded about them because you don't know everything, right? You will speak to users, and it's really important to recognize that a lot of the time you don't know what you don't know. So let them feed you the answers, let them steer your research. Don't go in it the other way around because that will inevitably trip you up and you will end up building the wrong service. User research, sitting within kind of the user-centered design approach, it will help you deliver a successful project because ultimately you are putting the user first. It means that whatever you are building it for that user and not for, say, a business need that is perhaps more important to your stakeholders, but not to your user. So whatever product you design, if you've done user research, at every point in that product or service lifecycle, you are going back to users and you are saying, hey, are we doing this right? And if we're not, what can we be doing instead? In the same way, again, talking about things like accessibility and inclusion. Accessibility and inclusion is not an afterthought. You have to think about it during your research and design phases, because if you don't, again, you will have issues when it comes to putting that service into live. You have to have thought about those things sooner rather than later, because to do it retrospectively is very difficult, very costly, and will take a lot of time. And also, it's not fair on your users. So put the user at the front. It will help you deliver a successful project. And that is, ultimately one of the main and guiding principles of UCD. I think deciding on the right questions to ask ultimately depends on what the project is and what that service is and what point you are at in that life cycle. Because in theory, if you're doing something like a discussion guide, for example, you will always want that to be as open-ended as possible. You will always want to let your users guide you to the answer, not the other way around. But there will be other times during your research sprints where you might need more concrete or quantitative, or maybe just a yes or no answer. It also depends on the methodology that you're taking as a user researcher. Like, a survey is probably not the best place to be asking open-ended questions. A survey might be more the place where you say, please pick from one of the following options, because otherwise you'll have users writing you thousands of lines of text that you then have to go through. And that's a huge research task as the UR. Equally, you might be in an alpha testing phase and do A/B testing to figure out whether option 1 is better or option 2 is better. And that is a simple yes or no. So it really, really does depend on the point that you are at. But one piece of advice I would definitely say is when it comes to any kind of methodology or approach that you're taking to do your research, ask for feedback and ask for critique from other user researchers, designers, delivery managers. UCD is an extremely supportive and collaborative community discipline. It really is. So don't be afraid to go to people and ask them what they think about the work that you're doing, because it will only help strengthen whatever it is that you're putting in front of that user. So for me, there's probably a couple things that I find quite hard about user research. The first one for me is remembering to be patient with users. You get some users who will be, who might be in their lunch break and not have very much time to talk to you. The opposite of that is that sometimes you will have users who only want to talk to you and talk at you. They don't necessarily understand or completely grasp that you have an objective to gain from that session. So instead, they might just see it as a bit of an opportunity to rant about, everything that's wrong with an existing service, or tell you 101 things that they want to see that you can't deliver to them because it's not within your remit. And that can be quite difficult. The best thing you can do is just listen and try really gently to bring it back to the discussion guide. So finding that balance between like being patient with them, bringing them back on topic, being sensitive and being there is really, really difficult. The other thing I would say, which I think every user researcher struggles with, is you will often encounter stakeholders or clients who don't understand what it is that you're there to do. And that's really, really challenging, because obviously they're the people who are in charge of the project and they're the people that you report to. But I think my advice for anybody in that scenario is to just remember that your number one role in that space is to advocate for that user. I have been on projects before where you have stakeholders tell you that a user need isn't important, or they overlook the importance of a user need that you maybe have identified. And one of those big ones for me is language. We're an extremely multicultural country. I always think about my grandmother as an example of this. Like, doesn't speak a word of English, is Spanish. So if you try to put her in front of a gov.uk service, she wouldn't be able to follow any of the on-screen instructions. And I've had projects in the past where we have identified exactly that need, and it wasn't prioritized in a way that I felt should have been necessary. And I think when you do that, you completely invalidate your user, because what you say is you are important, but you are not as important as the people who we are predominantly catering to. And it sits within that accessibility and inclusion, kind of spectrum of things. 3 words in English can be 10 words in another language, and that impacts design, and it impacts functionalities, and it impacts your page layout. So if you think about it as an afterthought, you're going to have issues with it. So the first big misconception people have about user researchers is that we do market intelligence. That is not our job. It's completely different to what we do. So you have to kind of stop people from thinking that is your role, responsibility, and let them actually understand what user research is. That's a big one. And the second one to me is that people often assume that you have to come from a particular background when you become a user researcher. The amount of people who have said to me, "Oh, you're a UR, so do you know how to code?" I'm like, "No, I don't know how to code. That's not what my job is." That's a misconception. User research sits within UCD and it sits within user experience, and there's all these different terms that fly about that nobody really knows what they mean unless you sit down and ask somebody. User research, you do not need any specific criteria or background or degree qualification to do it. So I think that for me is an extremely irritating misconception, because I think a lot of people would be really good at user research, particularly graduates, coming out of uni, who have all these really great skills and don't necessarily always know what to do with them. So yeah, that's one of the big ones for me. Any advice that I would give to someone who is either considering user research as a field or actively wants to pursue it, number one is think about all of the competencies that you have. Think about experiences that you've had, maybe when you've been at school, maybe at uni, maybe in a previous job. There's a 90% chance that one of those competencies or things that you've done is related to user research. Think about those competencies and think about how they would translate if you were talking about them within the user research area. That's my advice. And I would give that advice for any job that you apply for. You can adapt different examples to show the skill. The skill is what's important. It's not always the experience or how many years you do or don't have. And the second thing I would say, online courses are really, really good. And I was somebody who was very skeptical of them before the pandemic, but I did a couple of the Google UX certificates, and I found that they really helped me just to kind of cement that understanding that I had and take the theory out of it and put the practice into it. So if you have access to something like Coursera, or you can watch some YouTube videos or do a couple free courses online, I'd absolutely recommend it, because the more, even if they're small qualifications that you have that show more than anything an interest in user research, the better.